Okay.
Good evening. I'm Adam Herbst, the founding member of Excelsior NYC and a New York City resident for 25 years. I'd like to welcome you to our 2021 Mayoral Town Hall hosted by Excelsior NYC, the West Side Council of Orthodox Jewish Organizations, Zeb Brenner's Talkline Network, Stand Up New York, and Umu Health. Tonight, we will be hearing from the 7 leading candidates for New York City Mayor, each of them bringing a unique set of skills and experience to this race. I want to thank the candidates for joining us this evening and for their ambition to serve our city in what has become one of the more important elections in recent memory, a period that will see us emerge from a devastating pandemic where many thousands of our neighbors have lost their lives, a period that has likely seen the way that we work, go to school, and engage with our neighbors change forever, and a time when the city is looking to rebuild an economy with a truly uncertain future. It also comes as New Yorkers are deeply divided on emotionally charged issues like policing and police reform, and how we should tackle the city's rising crime and gun violence. In addition to the Zoom call, we're broadcasting live with Zeb Brenner's Talkline Network over WSNR 620 AM, and also over talklinenetwork.com, and our YouTube and Facebook channels. I'm proud to welcome the tens of thousands of viewers and listeners this evening. I believe that our sizable audience tuning into this forum tonight, instead of watching the Knicks playoff game, really shows the interest and impact of this race on the future of our city and the desire to get to know each other and other the candidates. Parenthetically, I'm here this evening and not at the Knicks game, even though I was offered a free ticket. Anyway, it's our job as New Yorkers to get to know each of these candidates, their strengths and weaknesses, and most importantly, learn about their capacity and capability to lead our city out of the pandemic and into the next chapter to meet the needs of all of its citizens. We formed Excelsior NYC several months ago because we saw the need to help advocate and educate here in New York City. However, it is all of our responsibility to play an active role in civic life and to make sure our collective voices are heard so that we each have an equal seat at the table within the public debate. I hope that we all take the opportunity tonight to get to know the candidates and their views on the issues that matter most to us, and of course to vote on June 22nd. This primary will be different because there will be ranked choice voting. Excelsior NYC will be providing information in the coming weeks about what this means on our website at excelsiornyc.org. But to put it simply, it means that you can rank your top 5 candidates in the order of your preference. This is being done to ensure that the winning candidates receive more than 50% of the votes and to avoid costly runoffs, so please stay tuned for more info on ranked choice voting. Before we get started, I want to state explicitly that Excelsior NYC and COJO are both nonprofits, and as such cannot and will not make any endorsements. This forum is intended to be informational, and all of the candidates included this evening met our inclusion criteria and were invited to participate. I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge all of those who helped to make this evening possible. Daniel Lowy, Donnie Zolden, Allison Bromberg, Andrew Ledwall, Adam Rosenberg, COJO Chairman Michael Landau, Rabbi Shoel Robinson, Rabbi Daniel Sherman, and Rabbi Avram Marmerstein. Thanks to each of them for all of the work they are doing up to Election Day and for keeping us focused to help make sure that we all vote. Finally, please note that all views expressed tonight are solely the views of the candidates and not that of COJO or Excelsior NYC. Okay, so tonight we'll be joined by Eric Adams, Scott Stringer, Ray McGuire, Maya Wiley, Kathryn Garcia, Shaun Donovan, and Andrew Yang. Unfortunately, Diane Morales did pull out at the last moment. We discussed our platform and process with each of the candidates in advance. They'll be joining us individually, one after the other, to engage with our moderator for 15 minutes each. They'll be given a 60-second opening statement, and then we'll jump into a range of questions by our moderator. And then towards the end of the 15-minute town hall, I'll be asking specific questions in light of the recent violent attacks on members of our community and fighting in Israel, so the candidates can either condemn or not the acts of hate crimes in our community, and whether they'll promote laws to prosecute the perpetrators and instigators, and try to understand the policies that they will enact or support to ensure that the police have the necessary powers to proactively protect the Jewish community and all communities in our city, so that our children and loved ones can feel safe and walk in the streets without being fearful of any attack. Finally, we'll allow each candidate 60 seconds of closing statements. The order of the candidates was determined by their schedules and also a random drawing by the Excelsior board. I want to note that all questions that will be asked this evening were submitted by members of our community and reflect the relevance of their interest and those listening tonight. Before I introduce our moderator, I want to quickly turn over to Zev Brenner to introduce himself. Zev?
Adam, thank you. This is such a wonderful opportunity for the candidates to express themselves. Too many New Yorkers that are tuning in don't know much about the candidate, don't know much about the issues. So first, we welcome all our thousands of listeners on the Talkline Network that are tuning in tonight. And it's just an important forum that people should become more engaged, more involved in the process, which is what it's all about. And I thank you and all the participants for making this happen tonight. Just want to mention that tonight's broadcast is graciously sponsored by EMU Health, which features a state-of-the-art ambulatory surgery center and newly renovated multi-specialty physician offices. They are conveniently located at 83-40 Woodhaven Boulevard in Glendale. EMU Health offers women's health, Genius 3D mammography, surgery center, GYN, cancer screening, primary care, orthopedics, cardiology, wellness, board-certified doctors, and so much more. Their award-winning facilities and staff are worth the trip from anywhere in Queens, Brooklyn, Manhattan. That's what they're sponsoring, a Manhattan event, at least originating from Manhattan. Most major insurance plans are accepted. For more information, call them 718-849-8700, 718-849-8700, online at emuhealth.com. Back to you.
Thanks, Zev. And now I'm honored to introduce our friend and esteemed moderator, Andrew Kirtzman. Andrew's well known to those following politics here in New York. He served as a political reporter for the New York Daily News, New York One News, and WCBS TV, hosting Inside City Hall and Kurtzman and Company for 2 stations. He's authored biographies of Rudy Giuliani and Bernie Madoff, and is currently at work on his second book about Giuliani. For the past 6 years, he has served as president of Kurtzman Strategies, a prominent New York City public affairs communications firm. Thank you, Andrew, for moderating tonight. And I'd like to turn it over to you to introduce our first candidate, Mr. Adams.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity. And there's Eric Adams in a car. How are you, Mr. Adams?
Quite well. This is a big city. 27 days away. You better be in a car moving around the city right now.
Right. And I'm glad you're wearing your seatbelt. Eric, it's a pleasure to see you again after all these years. We're giving each candidate a minute to start and a minute to finish, and then about 12 minutes where it's just you and me talking. So go ahead and please, what's your opening comment?
We are really at some challenging times right now in our city and how we're going to govern and move forward. And at the heart of it is what I've stated over and over throughout the years, Andrew. It's about public safety. The prerequisite to prosperity is public safety and justice. If we're not a safe city, we're not going to cycle out of the economic challenges that we're facing. We're not going to protect our communities from everything from hate crime to gun violence. So I'm looking forward to sharing my vision with New Yorkers and ensuring that we're a safe place to raise healthy children and families.
Great, thanks so much. You know, it's a terrific race from my perch, and you know, one of the major surprises of it, it could end up as the big surprise if things stay the way they are, is that after the Black Lives Matter movement created all of this kind of clamor for fundamental change in policing, bringing kind of the whole Democratic Party to the left. The biggest, the top tier leaders are all centrists, and I put you in that category. Why is that? Why are there centrists winning this race so far?
Well, I consider myself to be a progressive. I'm just a different brand of progressive.
Okay.
Thank you. Number one, yes, I support closing Rikers, but I also support closing the pipeline that feeds Rikers Island. I support having healthy options for healthcare in this country, but I don't believe in the sick care system we have. I believe in reversing chronic diseases. And I believe that we should do things that don't prevent crises. And so we've allowed others to define being a progressive thinker in a progressive city means that you have to embrace those concepts that are not really helpful to ending inequalities and preventing the unsafe atmosphere that we have. So I'm a progressive thinker, but I'm a pragmatic progressive in this city.
So what happened to defund the police? How come no one's talking about that anymore?
I have no idea. I've always been a believer that all of our agencies, including the police department, must be more efficient in how they use taxpayers' dollars. And so I don't think you can use bumper stickers when you come down to public safety. I believe our police department has an obligation and responsibility to keep us safe. Others embrace that concept, and I'm sure when you interview them, they'll share that. I think we do need to spend tax dollars in all of our agencies better than what we're doing, including the police department. We should not be spending $400 million in overtime when we can use technology to cut that down.
Right. Okay. You recently told the New York Post that, quote, if the same level of crime you're seeing in Black and brown and immigrant communities were all over the city, I don't believe you would see the silence that we see. What do you mean?
95% of shooters in this city are Black and brown. 95% of the victims are Black and brown. We would not respond to these types of crimes where young people are being the victims of shootings all over this city if this was something that was a city-wide crisis. I saw how well we responded after the 9/11 attacks. We created the JTTF, the Joint Terrorist Task Force, and we immediately dealt with terrorism. Have not had another terrorist attack in this city. Why aren't we showing that same level of energy on the federal, state, and city level to stop the flow of guns and to go after the shooters? I am really disappointed on the response from the city.
Well, who is it? Where's the silence coming from? I mean, is it coming from other candidates? Are they not talking about this issue?
From all over, and it's really deplorable when you think about it, that we're basically saying the lives of young people of color are not as important as other ethnic groups throughout the city.
To whom? Yes, I'm sorry, they're not as important to whom?
To the entire country. I cannot imagine. I see what happens, and I've been a leading voice about mass shootings in the urban and rural parts of our country, in the rural parts, suburban counties. We responded rapidly on the federal level to really rein in assault weapons. We should have that same level of attention. The real crisis in our country lies in the handgun. That's the crisis. We have not witnessed any major federal legislation dealing with the handgun. That's the largest number of deaths in the country, in the inner cities. And responding to your question about our other candidates, they did not come forward, Andrew, until there was a shooting of a 3-year-old in Times Square. I have been talking about this violence for almost a year and a half now, and none of the other mayoral candidates even interceded at all to talk about this.
Okay, and public safety and rising crime is, you know, it's dominant if you look at the polls. You know, there was a kind of consensus rebuke of broken windows under de Blasio, and you know, some would say as a result, we've seen a rise in crime. So here we are. What should the city's approach be to crimes such as prostitution, public urination, trespassing, public drug use? How do we deal with this in a way that doesn't produce kind of a neglect that produces more crime and more serious crime?
We don't have to be heavy-handed, and you know, throughout the years, you know, we've had many conversations. I talk about the quality of life is crucial. We should not have 3-wheel motorcycles on our sidewalks going throughout our streets. We should not have open defecation, people injecting themselves with drugs in front of our schools, encampments in front of our restaurants and shops. The city has reached a point, Andrew, where we're just any and everything goes. I was on the train the other day. Someone was barbecuing in between the train cars. You can't run a city like this. So, one, we need to zero in on gun violence. A plainclothes unit that is better trained must utilize their cameras and zero in on those gangs and gun users in the city. And we need to hold them accountable and not have them arrested for a gun shooting on one day and out the next day. We need to send a serious message that violence is not acceptable in the city.
Okay, so when you saw that person barbecuing between train cars, what did you want to happen? Did you want a police officer to come? Did you want a social worker? Did you want to just leave the guy alone? Like, what should happen in a case like that? Eric?
Yes, okay, you're back. That's a great question, Andrew, because you know what else happened on that train car, Andrew?
What's that?
The passengers who were on the car, they kept reading their papers and their books and reading their phone. They didn't even acknowledge that. We have become accustomed to dysfunctionality in this city. Right. So when I went to the gentleman and spoke with him and told him, not in a derogatory manner, but interacted with him and said that this is not something you can do. We as New Yorkers have fell into the same place we did during the mid 80s and early 90s when we had no radio signs in our cars. We have accepted the dysfunctionality of this city, and I'm not going backwards. My son is not growing up in the city that I grew up in, filled with violence and filled with just total disorder.
Okay, very interesting. From what I understand, please correct me if I have this wrong, you have proposed offering free childcare for ages 0 to 3 for all city residents. Do I have that right?
Those who cannot afford to pay for child's care,
okay,
on an economic scale.
All right, great. It's I don't know anyone who would be opposed to that, but how would you pay for it?
Looking at our leases, Andrew, it would surprise you that we have office spaces or agencies that are in luxury buildings. You look at the leases that we currently pay, we believe we can identify $250 million easily by moving those lease spaces, redoing the leases, moving to the outer boroughs where you have a cheaper footprint for how much you pay for leasing, and the money we save, we can place universal child care for those families who are in need and get our families able to work and ensure they have proper child care.
I mean, it sounds like a massive expense to me. I mean, how are you going to pay all those people providing child care?
No, it's not a massive expense, just the opposite. We have a lot of retail space that's available right now. And
are you paying people to look after people's children?
Yes, we do. And that's where the $250 million will come from that we can save in the leases we have throughout the city. But here's something else we should look at. We have a lot of retail space, that's now vacant because people are shopping online. Let's give discount and tax incentives to those owners of those retail spaces if they would give low cost to rent a space for childcare. That's one of the highest costs of childcare.
Right. Sorry, I may have missed this, but what's the total price tag of this, Eric?
We're looking at to start off with about $250 million.
Okay, to provide child care for every disadvantaged family in the city.
Yes, no, not every. We're doing it on a sliding scale. And then as we continue to reevaluate leases and change the renting of those leases, we could expand just the same way we did with 3K.
Right. Let's switch to education.
Yes.
So, even after all these years of, Giuliani trying and Bloomberg trying and, de Blasio didn't try, but you still in this public school system cannot fire a bad teacher for poor performance. You cannot give a raise to a great teacher for great performance. How do you feel about that? And what would you do as mayor?
Well, I think that's the wrong conversation we're having. I believe the conversation we should be having is how do we scale up excellence? We don't do that in the Department of Education. We continue to fight between private, between charter schools and district schools. My focus is scaling up excellence. Number one, we're going to look at the extended school day. We're going to look at extended summer months, something the mayor has agreed upon. I've been talking about this throughout the campaign. We're still following an agrarian calendar. It makes no sense at all. And then we're going to return joy back into the classroom of learning.
Okay, sorry, Eric, we're almost out of time here, but how do you run a business where you can't fire someone who's doing a lousy job?
And you can. There is a process to get rid of teachers that are doing a lousy job. One could argue how long it takes. Should it be shorter or not? But there is a process. No one has.
It's a process that takes so long, and really is reserved for the most severe cases. I mean, don't you agree with that?
No, I don't. I think the DOE must do his job, but also let's think about this for a moment. There's something called vicarious trauma. Many of our teachers are going through vicarious trauma because we're not giving them the support, the resources that they need. Far too many dollars never make their way into the classroom, and we need to think about how we're doing that.
Okay. All right. I believe you got a minute to close here, Eric.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, sorry. I'm off program. I'm off the program. Adam gets to ask you a question, and then you get to close. Apologies.
Okay, good to see you, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew.
Likewise, Eric.
Likewise, Adam.
Hey, Eric, how are you? Two-part question. This represents quite an interest in our community. Your tweet supporting Israel prompted significant backlash, including a lost endorsement. As mayor, how would you navigate the competing interests and voices on questions surrounding Israel and its economic and cultural relationship with New York City? And also the second part of that question is, clearly after the attacks in Times Square and on 47th Street, among others, anti-Semitic attacks have risen to a level that we haven't seen in generations. How would you address the roots of rising anti-Semitism here in New York?
Well, I do not go back and forth on my support for Israel and my support for the Jewish community and all communities in the city. I want to be clear on that. I did not support any movement that state you should not travel to Israel. I traveled to Israel twice. I traveled to countries in the Middle East as well several times. I'm going to do what I have been consistent at doing, bringing people together. New York should lead the way on tolerance. I was sick to my stomach to watch a young man stomped, maced, and kicked. And I called his dad and I talked to Joseph's dad, and we shared as a person who has a son, I would never want to see that happen to my son. And that's why I held that press conference in Times Square. I want to do things like breaking bread, building bonds, 100 dinners across the city, 10 people from each dinner, talking about their different cultures and ethnicity. We have to come together. We are a segregated city. We're seeing an increase in anti-Semitism, increase in anti-Asian violence, an increase in other groups and communities. That is not the city I'm going to live in. And if good people don't come together and communicate, we're going to allow those bad people to take over the energy of our city.
Thank you. Andrew.
All right. Eric, I believe Eric now has a minute to close. Is that right, Adam?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you.
All right. We're getting this format down at your expense, Eric.
Yes.
Here, please say something to close this.
Andrew, I went through my entire public school education going to bed at night, believing I couldn't learn. I was getting a D every year, watching children leave the school in the classroom before I did. It wasn't until I was in college that I stumbled on a video about learning disabilities and realized I had a learning disability. I showed myself how to overcome that learning disability. And I went from a D student to on the dean's list throughout my school. Our city can't be about luck. I should not have to be lucky to get a quality education. You shouldn't have to be lucky to get a voucher for housing, or lucky not to have a bullet kill your child, or lucky not to be attacked because you're Jewish or because you're African American, or lucky to open a business and have the Department of Building have the right inspector to open the door. The city can't be about luck. It must be about opportunity. And the next mayor can't be a manager. They must be a visionary to take our city to the next level and keep it safe in the process. And that's what I'm going to do as the mayor of the city of New York.
Great. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay, Andrew, we have our next candidate, Scott Stringer, is joining us. Andrew, please.
Hello, Mr. Controller. How are you?
Hello, Andrew. Long time.
You know, it's been a long time. It's a good thing we both look exactly the same, huh? Neither of us got any older.
I was just going to say that this is bringing me back memories of being interviewed on Inside City Hall. Oh, boy.
Right. Well, if you think it's brought back memories now, just wait. Okay, so let's get serious here. Your campaign obviously went through a very rough patch. It stopped your momentum. The allegations of sexual harassment were very serious, but you refused to bow out. You're there fighting. We're now a few weeks past that incident. How do you think New Yorkers are looking at you now as they're weighing whom to vote for mayor?
Well, look, there was an allegation of 20 years ago that is untrue, not corroborated, and absolutely false. I can tell you, as I campaign outside Fairway, outside Zabar's and around the city, that the support I've received from voters has been really outstanding and wonderful, and I'm very grateful. Look, I'll tell you politically where I think the campaign is. Nobody knows anything. The polling in this race is almost impossible. There was a great New York Times article that said basically the big public polls are not, they're not even polling this race. So I can only tell you what I'm feeling out in the streets. I've always been a candidate, whether it was for borough president, whether it was for controller, that always comes on in the last few weeks. And you know this, I've never started out a race ahead, but I've never lost coming from behind. So I'm hoping that we could, move forward and talk about the issues. And I think we do need a mayor who has the experience to manage this city on day one, but also has a vision for what this city could be.
Right. Okay. And do you think that you're getting points with voters for kind of hanging in there and kind of fighting your way through this?
Well, New Yorkers, and I'm a lifelong New Yorker. I grew up in Washington Heights. I'm a assemblyman from the West Side. I've been to more community meetings and community board meetings. I know the pace of the neighborhood. I can only tell you what West Siders like. They like somebody who gets knocked down but can get back up. And we're going to need a mayor who has the strength and the perseverance to do the big work of building our greatest comeback. And so I'm tough. I've been doing this for a long time. No one has the political skills. No one has the Albany skills. No one has the land use skills. And no one has the financial background understanding the city budget that I do. So I'm actually very hopeful that I can get that message out. We're doing it on television. We're doing it with 1,000 volunteers. I'm proud to have the support of Congressman Jerry Nadler, Assemblymember Linda Rosenthal, and literally hundreds and hundreds of people from the community who know me since I started out, more years than I'm going to even admit to you, Andrew.
Fair enough. So if you win, what will New Yorkers notice will be the biggest difference between the de Blasio administration and the Stringer administration?
Well, I'm going to actually govern the city. I'm going to build an administration that has great capacity to build the affordable housing that we need, to make changes to our education system. One of the advantages I have is I've audited every city agency. I know where the wasteful spending is happening. I know how we can build back the city because I've been fighting the de Blasio administration for 8 years. Remember, there are some people who are de Blasio employees who are now running against the administration. I'm the person who took on the de Blasio administration every step of the way.
But I try to kind of answer specifically, stylistically or governmentally, how will we notice that things have really changed as opposed to, just the names and the faces?
Well, we're going to implement our economic agenda first and foremost. I'm going to build an administration that has capacity to do what exactly? To implement my affordable housing plan. We have to end sheltering people at these dangerous places. We need to build housing with supportive services. I have a plan to do that. We need an education system that is going to invest in mental health initiatives and resources in the classroom.
But if I could just stop you, I feel like this could have been a speech that de Blasio gave. How would your administration be different? The rhetoric sounds similar.
Well, if you look at what I've accomplished in the assembly, the effective legislator I was in Albany, I know I can restart that relationship because I have Albany experience. No one's going to steal my money in Albany. As borough president, I understood community-based planning, reformed the community boards, and then did the big work of university expansion with community consultation. As controller, I've looked at all of the de Blasio mistakes and held them on the carpet. And when you talk about bringing the city back, I refinanced city debt. I was able to save the taxpayers $2.2 billion and then identify $1 billion in savings. So I tell you this, Andrew, because I have real experience doing what I say I'm going to do. And while de Blasio may have been here years ago with a different rhetoric or set of agenda, don't hold me accountable to sounding like him because I've acted totally opposite over the last 8 years. I've been the person who's held this administration accountable.
Okay. Great. What happened to defund the police in terms of your campaign? You were for it. You were very kind of vocal about it. Are you still for defunding the police?
Well, I think that is a word that doesn't truly talk about my policing plan. And if you give me a second, I'd like to talk about it.
Right. But you did use that term. You were for defunding police, quote unquote.
You know, unless we want to revisit our inside City Hall days, if you just give me an opportunity to speak to the people, I'll tell you what my plan is. If you don't want me to, we can go back and forth. It's up to you.
No, I do want you to. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I grew up in the city in the 1970s when there were 2,000 murders a year. The 8 train that I took was a roving crime scene, and it was a very dangerous place. I want people to know that as mayor, we're not going back to those days, not for my kids and not for your kids. And so what I want to do as mayor is focus the police to do the job of policing, to go after the violent crimes, to up the clearance rates, meaning the crimes that we're not solving. We're now at an all-time low of 21%, between 21 and 26%. So I'm going to put more resources into the homicide units, into the neighborhood hotspots where the guns are being run. I'm going to work with federal and state authorities to make sure that we have a plan to get guns out of our neighborhoods. And then when it comes to funding, and this is where the defund message matters, is I'm going to take money from the police budget, especially the $300 million from One Police Plaza, which has been basically increased by 74% for the bureaucracy. I'm going to take that money and I'm going to put it into our local precincts, making sure that we have enough staffing and also enough programs to keep our kids away from the criminal justice system. Violence.
Right. I mean, I think the thrust of defund the police was that our police forces have just grown too large, too aggressive, and the way that the defund the police movement offered to change that was to defund them, to lose billions, to cut billions of dollars from them, and kind of emasculate these departments. What I hear you saying is you want to take $300 million from one part of the police department and give it to another part of the police department.
What I called for was cutting $265 million a year and directing it into new programs that would actually calm the violence and invest in the kids and keep them away. I'm not the candidate who says we should cut $3 billion. That makes no sense. I have a very detailed plan to keep our community safe. I want to cut through the bloated NYPD bureaucracy. I want to redesign local precincts to be more responsive. Well, let me finish. And I want to end ineffective over-policing practices that have wasted resources and undermined public safety by creating a culture of distrust in communities of color. But we also have to invest in programs to get gun off the streets and interrupt cycles of violence. And let me just give you one statistic.
If I could just, we're running out of time, so I'd kind of like to cover a few more bases if I could respectfully. The subways, as you know, the crime problem has just started scaring a lot of New Yorkers, particularly in the subways. When you take the subways, how are you feeling in terms of your safety? And do you have any fear of taking the subways?
I don't fear taking the subways, and I didn't fear taking the subways when I was a kid in Washington Heights, when the subways were much different back then. But look, we have people with serious mental illnesses living in our subways, and we need to have a mental health response to get them the supportive services they need. That is got to be a #1 priority. I understand that a lot of people think that if you flood the zone with more cops, the situation is going to change. In my view, talking to experts, that's not going to change. We need a comprehensive approach to mental health initiatives. We've got to get people who are suffering because they don't have medicine and supportive services out of the trains and into the programs that work.
Let me ask you a question on that note that I asked Eric Adams, which was, every New Yorker understands this example where you're sitting in a seat in a subway car, and someone who seems mentally ill kind of takes over the stage, interrupts everyone, gives a kind of deranged speech. What are you thinking then, are you thinking we need a police officer here? Are you thinking we need a social worker here? What's going through your mind about what to do in that situation?
Look, I think as someone has been in the subway since I was 12 years old, watching many different people come into the train, some people asking for money to feed their families, some people coming in because they obviously are having mental health issues or they're homeless.
Right.
My heart goes out to them, and we need to make sure that they find shelter and supportive services. That is what government is supposed to do. Now, we also have to make sure that we keep the subway safe and our communities safe, but we have to also recognize that we have cut psychiatric treatment beds in New York City. That's wrong. We need more supportive housing. We need more safe haven beds. And
Right.
we've got to build permanent supportive housing. And I have a plan to do that. And
Right. But sorry, if I could take you back to the question, which is, what would you like? I mean, the reason that police have been kind of employed for situations like this is because there are so many of them, right? They're the only kind of government employees who can actually come when you call them on a moment's notice. It's hard to get a social worker down somewhere, within 5 minutes. What are your thoughts about that? What do you do about, a situation where something has to be done right there and then?
well, you asked me two different questions. You said, what do I think about when someone comes on the train and is not acting in a dangerous way, but is obviously exhibiting signs of mental illness? I don't think you rush for the phone and call 911. I don't think New Yorkers do that. I've been on the train in many situations, and a lot of these incidents are not life-threatening in any way. So I don't think that's the question. I think the real question, if I may, is what do you do with the thousands of people who are living in our subways, in our subway cars? And that is going to require—
What do you do?
Well, one of the things you have to start doing, and we talk about how we're going to help the homeless, but we talk about helping the homeless, but we never think about providing a home. And I have a plan that would build the supportive housing we need by accessing our vacant properties around the city to create a subsidy so that we can get us out of the shelter business and into the permanent supportive housing business. Under my administration, we're going to build 10,000 supportive housing units per year, and I'm very committed to doing that.
What about building all those shelters? Been using hotels for use as shelters. It's caused a lot of controversy, including the Upper West Side, where you're from. Will that continue in a Stringer administration?
Shoot, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the end of that.
Converting hotels for use for homeless shelters, will that continue if you're elected?
Look, I hope that we can get out of converting hotels and investing with slumlords, and rather investing in supportive housing services with reputable organizations to build the permanent housing that we need. That's the solution. As borough president and as the West Side Assembly member, there were times that we had to do our part and shelter the homeless. And one of the things I was able to do successfully as borough president in the Assembly is I worked with community stakeholders to make sure that whatever shelters or services that were going to be provided were safe, were transparent, and that the community and the community board would have a voice. Look, in my years representing the West Side, were there overheated meetings and conversations? Absolutely. Did we also find solutions? We certainly did.
Okay, sorry, we're running out of time. Adam has a question for you before your time's up.
Hi, Adam.
Hey, Scott. Nice to see you.
See you.
So you've made it clear that you're courting the progressives in this race. And that includes a lot of people who don't support Israel's right to exist in peace and security. The Democratic Socialists of America tried to make Israel their wedge issue in this election, demanding a pledge from candidates that they would not travel to Israel for any reason. How would you balance the progressive voices against Israel with being mayor of the largest Jewish community in the world outside of Israel? And how would you balance progressive voices against policing with empowering the police to protect the Jewish community?
Well, let me just give you a fun fact. A lot of those elected officials you referenced are no longer supporting me. So I would ask the question differently. But look, I have been to Israel with a delegation, and I will lead a delegation to Israel when I'm mayor. As controller, I've invested in Israeli bonds over the time as controller. I deplore the BDS movement and have spoken out against it every year I've been an elected official. And I can't tell you what every elected official in the city feels about a particular issue. That's not my job. That's your job to find out where people stand, just like you're asking me. I can tell you that my record on Israel is strong, and it has been consistent. And also, just so people know, my wife is executive director of the Jewish Heritage Museum. And the Holocaust and the teaching of the Holocaust is very much a part of my family and how we're raising our children. And I do know that when it comes to anti-Semitism, that when I had to bring my kids to their synagogue school on the Upper West Side, and that they had to pass through a metal detector every day to get to school. And I'd be lying to you if I didn't watch where the undercover police officers were, because I was worried about my kids because they were Jewish. And it has stayed with me during that time period. And my job as mayor is to protect the Jewish community, to fight anti-Semitism, to make sure that we all feel safe. And one of the ways we do that, Adam, is we don't do it alone. We do it building coalitions. And when
Scott, if I, sorry, you've got a minute to wrap up, so this is your time.
Okay. One of the ways that I was able to do that was to work with stakeholders in all communities, in the African American Clergy Coalition, in the Muslim community. One of the ways a mayor brings communities together is that one group that is attacked, we all fight back. And I will continue to do that. At the same time, I will work with communities on a safety plan, because hate speech and hate attacks have no place in the city.
All right. Well, thank you, Scott Springer. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everybody. It's good to almost see you. Thank you.
Take care.
Andrew, I'd like to introduce our next candidate, Ray McGuire.
Hello, how we doing?
Ray, how are you? Nice to see you again.
How are you all doing tonight?
We're great. We're great. Under the rules, you get a minute to open. So feel free, you have the floor, and then we'll start a little chat.
So listen, we are at a moment in time in this city's history where we can choose whether or not our best days are ahead of us or our best days are behind us. Everywhere I go, New Yorkers tell me they want change. The status quo is failing them. The same movie that has been playing now for the past few years continue to play at your local city hall theater. New Yorkers want a mayor for the comeback who's going to pursue economic recovery relentlessly. They want a mayor who's going to restore safety in our streets and subways and finally get our kids educated. I grew up with very little. I was raised by my single mother, along with my grandparents, who raised me and my three brothers and half a dozen foster siblings at any point in time. I didn't know my dad, but my mother made a way. I know what it means to struggle, and I'll bring every New Yorker along in this comeback. I have broken down barriers in business. I know how to turn this city's economy around. As a political outsider, I'll make decisions solely on the merits. I do not owe anybody any political favors. Zero. Bupkis. New York needs a mayor who's a doer, not a talker. Your ballot's going to look different this year. I'm the fourth one down. Rank me number one. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for coming here, Ray. Of all the candidates running, I'm a little, I guess, most perplexed about your campaign. You've got an extraordinary, both professional and personal story. You're very well financed. You're a centrist. You've got endorsements, but lots of money. But yesterday's poll, you polled at 2%. So what's gone right and what's gone wrong for you so far, and where do you go from here?
I have tended not to look at the polls. I think there was an article recently in maybe the New York Times where what they referenced was this polling is everywhere, the result of which is nowhere. So I'm focused on where the voters are. I've been to everywhere you can imagine talking to the voters, and the response that I get from the voters once they understand my story, the conversion rate, we've talked probably 150,000 door knocks, 200 to 250 to 300,000 calls. New Yorkers want something different. And so my message and my journey is a message that's resonating with New Yorkers.
And what do you need to do kind of going forward to kind of bump up your standing right now?
I just continue to do what I'm doing, talking to New Yorkers. The response has been overwhelmingly positive. Again, people are tired of seeing the same movie. It's been running for 100 years collectively, all the players, and we've gone backwards, nowhere.
Okay. You've had an extraordinary professional career, but this is your first rodeo when it comes to politics. What's been the biggest surprise for you? What have you learned that surprised you the most in this campaign?
What I've learned is that the system perpetuates itself in ways that I hadn't and couldn't have imagined. The objective that most see is once they're in office to stay in office. You know, I thought this was a journey of service. And while I've been a public service in a private sector, I thought that's what this was about. I thought it was serving the people and making sure that people's lives improve. And that was the overarching journey. I see now that a lot of this is about preserving, you know, where they've been, people have gotten termed out. They're looking for promotions. They've been involved in many of these administrations. Many fail. They've run for public office and fail. And so this is it's a consolation prize for some, a consolation prize for some, and it's a career aspiration for others.
Who are you referring to?
Pardon?
Who are you referring to?
We'll just look at the line of people who are every single, there's a whole group out there who've either been termed out, looking for a promotion, served in another administration, or failed at running for another office.
Sorry, are you talking about mayoral candidates? And if so, who
I'm talking about just take a look at all the other mayoral candidates. Collectively, that's 100 years of service. We've gone backwards in education. We've gone backwards in the economy. We've gone backwards in healthcare. We continue to go backwards. And all that it did, what COVID has done is not only exposed, but exacerbated the pre-existing conditions.
Right. And who specifically has, termed out and is just looking for another job in this race?
I think you look at a lot of them, the track record here. Look at the people who've been termed out. Look at the one looking for promotion. You got people been running for this office for most of their lives.
Are you less than impressed by the field of mayoral candidates?
I am less than impressed. The answer is I'm less than impressed because they had their chance. They had their chance. And this is the same rhetoric. Maybe it's a different speaker, but the same rhetoric.
Right.
I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. What have they been doing? What's happened? They all had the opportunity. Many of the things that they're describing they're going to do has already happened on their watch. All of a sudden, they're going to reverse course and do something different.
All right. Let's turn to public safety, something we're talking a lot about tonight, which polling has showed is number one in the minds of New Yorkers. I've been doing this for a long time and kind of watching how this kind of unfolds through many administrations. And, there's been this seesaw between clamors for police reform when, horror stories of police brutality come to fore, right? Mm-hmm. The reforms happen, crime rises, and then, the seesaw swings the other way, and there's a clamor for more policing, right? And tougher policing, which is probably what we're seeing right now. Now, every mayoral candidate and every mayor for the last several decades has been trying to find that third way, right? Where you don't have to do one, you don't have to do the other. I can do both. I can have smarter policing and, without the brutality. What is this magic formula that can allow us to keep crime down, but also keep police aggression to an acceptable level?
Is there a magic formula? I'm not convinced of the magic formula. There are ways that have been effective when we invested to prevent the criminal mindset from the outset, investing in community centers, investing in community policing, investing in summer jobs, which help the attraction that a criminal mindset, the criminalization of poverty occurs, which is what we're now dealing with, which has resulted in the acts of violence that we're experiencing, not only gun violence, but also the acts of violence that we're experiencing on our subways, the result of which is that we have so many amongst us who are mentally ill. COVID has just exacerbated that. So what
do we do about those people?
So for the mentally ill, in my policing plan, which you can see at rayformayor.com, I have as one of the initiatives I'm going to implement is emergency social services. 4 to 5 of the 10 calls that go into 911 have to do with mental health care issues. Right. I want to make certain that I got an emergency social services corps inside the precincts, inside the subway. That's number one. Number two, we need to make certain that we invest in Kendra's Law. we have the assisted outpatient treatment centers. The budget in a $240 million healthcare budget is $1.3 million. I will get that at least $5 million. We need to increase the number of psychiatric beds, safe beds. We also need to make certain that we increase the assertive community treatment. Those healthcare professionals who go out and interact on a daily basis with those who are mentally ill. We need to make certain that when we do engage Kendra's law more, that we appeal to the courts to see that we strike a balance between civil liberties and those mentally ill who are a threat to themselves.
You mentioned
a threat to ourselves and a threat to New Yorkers.
Okay, fair enough. You mentioned psychiatric beds, and that the story of homelessness in New York, traces back to the closing of mental institutions. Is the pendulum swinging back the other way? What are you referring to when you talk about an increase in psychiatric beds? Do we need to kind of roll back that trend a little and reopen kind of psychiatric kind of, I don't want to call them institutions, but psychiatric places where these mentally ill homeless people should be housed?
So the answer is we need to come up with a system that clearly treats those who are mentally ill with dignity, striking the balance between civil liberties, their civil liberties, and the threat that they have to themselves and New Yorkers. So the answer is we cut out, when we began to reduce 600 to 650 psychiatric beds. Just think about the lives that could have been saved had we intervened at the right time. We missed that opportunity. So the answer is yes, we need to reinvest.
Right. We
do need to reinvest.
When you see a homeless person urinating on the street, what do you think? What goes through your mind about what needs to happen?
What needs to happen, or what do I think?
I mean, what do you think? What are you thinking has to happen at that moment to get to solve this ridiculous problem?
We need help. He needs help. She needs help. There's intervention. There's serious intervention, which is why I talked about the assisted outpatient office that we have. It's 8 times less likely once those people receive treatment that they're going to be involved in any kind of serious incident. So I say we have troubled New Yorkers. That situation is going to get exacerbated. It has been exacerbated by COVID. It's only going to get worse. The situation existed before. We just weren't dealing with it. It is now out front and center.
Okay. I want to turn this over to Adam, who's got a question for you.
Okay, Adam's got a question for me.
Thanks, Andrew. And hey, Ray, how are you?
Hey, Adam, how you doing?
Good. You were the first candidate to tweet in support of Israel and its right to self-defense. 2-part question. Number one, can you tell us what drove you to release that statement? And also, how do you think we should respond to the rise in anti-Semitism that we're seeing across the city right now?
I have long-standing and deep relationships. I don't know, it goes back for the most of my life. And so, it's essentially how I've grown up and that which I've respected. In this day and age, I reference, in the States and in Israel, I reference the anti-Semitism that is now becoming that much more pervasive. We need to stop it. We need to denounce it. And as the leader of the city, I will do that, which is why I came out in defense of. We need to, I'm certainly encouraged that we've reached a ceasefire, but we need to continue to make sure that the relationships and somebody who can bridge those relationships exist in the city, which I can do. I've been to the Western Wall. I've walked the Via Dolorosa. I've visited the Dome of the Rock. I've been there. I understand the cultural differences, but I also understand that the humanity can prevail and should prevail. And that is that for which I stand. And as the mayor of this city, I will lead and I will denounce anti-Semitism every single time. You know what? My reference point, which you may or may not know, which you may or may not appreciate, but you should, is a letter written in 1963 by the great Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel that talked about race and religion. It informs me. And that's the same year that he met Martin Luther King Jr. Then in 1965, the iconic photograph showed them marching together. And so it's that kind of relationship that I've been led to lead in my own life, which is why you saw my response.
Great. Ray, you get a minute to close. So stage is yours.
Listen, first of all, thank you for the opportunity. Given my lived experiences, given what I've been able to accomplish in this city, and given the fact that I've been able to be involved in helping to weave and bring together this city and what I've done civically, I've been a public servant in the private sector at a moment in time when this city needs a mayor in whom they can believe and a mayor in whom they can trust, and a mayor who has a demonstrated track record of managing large budgets and bringing people together and being held accountable against the most stringent standards. I came into the world of finance and there was one or two people look like me. I had to break down doors and break down barriers. I made certain that in so doing, I extended the ladder. I've created more opportunities and more jobs and more wealth than all the other candidates combined. I am an outsider. New Yorkers need somebody who's not wed to any constituents. New Yorkers need an outsider who can bring the city together, who has the experience and the judgment and the relationships, who can build a team to make certain that this city's best days are ahead of us and not behind. I am that leader. I'm the leader who can represent the best interests of New York City and all New Yorkers and bring the city together and manage a budget.
Okay.
Bring in the public-private partnerships that are necessary for all New Yorkers to benefit from what I call the greatest, most inclusive comeback in the history of New York City.
Thank you, Ray McGuire. Totally appreciate you joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. And those that are just tuning in, you're listening to a presentation of the mayoral candidates here on Talkline Network over WSNR 620 AM and WJPR 1640 AM. And Talkline with Zev Brenner is not on tonight, so we can present this very, very special for you.
Thanks, Zev.
I just want to say that tonight's broadcast is graciously sponsored by EMU Health, which features a state-of-the-art ambulatory surgery center, newly renovated multi-specialty physician offices. Their community located at 4340, that's 83-40 Woodhaven Boulevard in Glendale, Queens. EMU Health offers women's health, Genius 3D Mammography Surgery Center, GYN, cancer screening, primary care, orthopedics, cardiology, wellness, board-certified doctors, and so much more. Their award-winning facilities and staff are worth a trip from anywhere in Queens, Brooklyn, and Manhattan. And that's what we're talking about them, where we're originating from in New York City, Manhattan. Most major insurance plans are accepted. For more information, please call 718-849-8700. That's 718-849-8700. Online at emuhealth.com.
Thanks, Zev. Okay, Andrew, I'd like to introduce our next candidate, Maya Wiley.
Hi, Maya. How are you? Nice to see you tonight. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Andrew. It's a real pleasure to be with you.
Terrific. All right, our format begins with a 1-minute opening statement. Then we'll spend about 12, 13 minutes just chatting. And then you'll do the same thing again with a 1-minute closing statement. So please, the floor is yours.
Well, wonderful. Look, let me just start by saying, as the child of civil rights activists, I was fortunate to grow up in a family where we had very close relationships with the Jewish community on civil rights issues. Grew up as a child going to Freedom Seders, and my whole career I've spent as a civil rights lawyer working on coalitions that bring us together to get what we need for our communities. And, as a mom and a partner to a partner who is Jewish, and his mother and grandparents are Holocaust survivors, German Jews who have a devastating story, also a miraculous one of his grandfather being taken after Kristallnacht to Sachsenhausen. That was a visit we made in February before COVID shut us down, because there was a ceremony to remember his grandparents. And so I have children growing up in an interfaith household, and I am running because in this city, we are phenomenally powerful in our diversity and in the fact that we have everyone here. And in a crisis like this, and at a time when we have seen a devastating rise in anti-Semitism, a rise that impacts my family, that we cannot stand as a city divided. We must be united. And I will vote as a mayor for all of New York City.
Okay, so let's get into it, Maya. So, you spoke so eloquently as a commentator on MSNBC. I watched you so many nights. I think I sat on panels with you a certain number of times. And, I think you earned a lot of respect and a lot of credibility, particularly during the Black Lives Matter movement. So here we are now, and it seems, politically speaking, some of the legislative wins are out of the sails that came out of that movement. And I speak particularly of defunding the police, but also other kind of major reforms. So tell me, what do you think went right and went wrong with the kind of political fallout of the protests?
Well, look, let me just start by saying, and I'm very explicit with everyone about this, what it means to grow up Black in America is to know what it's like to fear crime and to know what it's like to fear police violence. And I did hear you, Andrew, asking Ray this question. It is possible, and we must be safe from crime and from police violence. And I don't think those are two things we have to choose between.
How do you do
One
it?
of the things, well, let me tell you, I actually have this plan outlined. One, we have to focus policing on the job we absolutely need police officers focused on, like keeping illegal guns out of our city and off our streets, like going after violent criminals, making sure that we're safe, doing it in partnership with community. And one of the things that we must change is that we don't have community policing as a strategy of policing. We have units that are community policing, but it's not
Right.
An ethos of the entire police department. We have to change that and focus on this model of partnership policing and problem-solving policing.
Right.
That will make us safer, but also invest in the things that strengthen our communities. Because one of the things we know, and I say this as someone who's also been a professor of public and urban policy, when we impact and reduce violence, it is because we make it easier to get a job than a gun. It is because
if I could follow up on this,
Yeah.
If I may, that
Yes.
I've been trying to think back. How many mayors have talked about community policing have succeeded in keeping crime down? And I'm not sure there have been any. I mean,
David Dinkins.
well,
David
well, let me. Well,
Okay.
let me. I'll talk
Okay.
about that in a moment. But
Okay.
it
Fine.
seems to my recollection that it's only been kind of the Republican mayors who've been extremely aggressive in policing and have gotten themselves in trouble because of it, who've seen major decreases in crime. Dinkins achieved that only when he hired a whole bunch of new cops. So tell me now about how we managed to do this without the Giuliani-Bloomberg approach to policing.
Well, so, first of all, Andrew, let's just be very clear about what David Dinkins did. You are right that he hired more police officers, but he actually introduced community policing, but he also invested in the community. Remember that he had the schools initiative where he opened up the school buildings and he invested in communities in ways that had nothing to do with policing. And
do you think that brought down crime? Do you think that's what brought down crime under Giuliani?
Absolutely help bring down crime, because there's also research that shows that one of the least well understood truths about what has brought down crime rates is community-based organizations. But what happens is, we so often, we only get little windows into all the things that are happening that are impacting crime. And, when you back up and look at the research, and let me give you one specific example,
okay.
After Eric Garner was murdered, and I say he was murdered, after Eric Garner was murdered for the crime of poverty, right? It is the only allegation was that he sold in untaxed cigarettes. There's a way to handle that differently, but let's back up from that, because remember, and then we had the awful killings, murders of those two police officers in Brooklyn, and then the police, because we were talking about different kinds of reforms and approaches, did a work slowdown. And when that work slowdown occurred, crime rates went down. And that has happened in other cities and other instances as well.
Well,
and
aren't those police scared that they're going to face arrest and indictment and being thrown in jail if they make the wrong move? Like, isn't that why they
no.
took their
No. That is not. No,
slow down?
No, well, that's not what happened. That is not the fact of what happened in
Tell me.
2014. What happened is they were protesting changes and reforms they didn't want that had not taken place. And it was a protest. But my point is, when they were doing less policing, crime rates went down. And I can also give you examples of where shootings increase with police presence. And in fact, we
Right.
have city council members that have done these incredible partnerships with the police department and saying, don't come to this hotspot. Let the community organize around what keeps our
Okay.
streets safe here. And it worked. So
Okay,
there
let's-
is a different model.
Got it. All right, let's do a little corollary to education, if I could here. So under Mayor Bloomberg, you know, rebuilt the system for, you know, you may have liked it or hated it, and but one of the primary tools he used was closing failing schools, right? Close a school, the community would be, you know, outraged. Often it would be done without consultation. And then he would reopen schools and reconfigure them, new principals, new teachers, new atmosphere, new ethos. De Blasio comes along, totally scraps the Bloomberg model, and he does renewal schools, right, which are otherwise known as community schools. And he puts community, you know, healthcare institutions there, things that sound terrific. The renewal program spent a gargantuan amount of money, and was and failed and was scrapped by the de Blasio administration. So what works in terms of education if community schooling ain't doing it? What's going to save the schools besides closing them down?
Well, look, you just said something, Andrew, that I believe deeply in and I'm going to expand, which is the community school model. It is, you know, where there is community-based partnerships, wraparound services and supports for children and families that enable and expand their learning opportunities. It's an incredibly important model. We should have never cut some of that budget in the June budget. There's good research behind it. And another thing I'll give Bloomberg credit for as well is you know, really creating more support for principals to innovate. You know, that is something that we have to
give them a lot
do.
of autonomy, right?
And so we want accountability, right? It's not that we want to lose accountability in the system. All public servants need to be accountable, but we do have to have innovation. And there are innovations that do happen in our system, but you know, principals kind of hide them and try to keep them quiet. But what we really need to do is support that innovation happening. But I do want to say one thing that was bad. I don't want to lose it because it's very important to me, Andrew, because I went to a segregated, overcrowded, underfunded public elementary school when I was a child.
Okay, what is it?
He contributed to the segregation of our schools. And so we do have to eliminate policies and practices that don't serve a fair and equitable system, and I will get rid of those. But I do also want to acknowledge what was good and what we need to expand. Okay,
so in a nutshell, in a few words, if you were elected mayor, which of the Bloomberg educational reforms would you bring back, I guess?
Well, I would expand the community school-based model, and I would create more power for principals and teachers to innovate in schools, and I'd actually create more supports from it. I'm going to go beyond that and also hire 2,500 more teachers, bring down class sizes, but also put trauma-informed care in the schools. That's one thing we have been missing and have not done, and our kids are traumatized, and it does impact learning.
Right. Okay. Let's switch gears and talk about the economy and particularly the eviction moratorium. Right. So, I mean, a lot of people were thrown out of work during COVID and were deeply appreciative for the eviction moratorium. The people who are not so appreciative are the landlords who still had to pay their rent. They still had to pay the utility bills. You know, no one was giving them any kind of relief. Should that eviction ban be lifted? I mean, do you have a sympathy for the landlords in addition to the tenants? And what do we do?
Oh, yeah. Well, first, let me just start with saying I have tremendous sympathy for the landlords and homeowners. You know, one of the things that we have to remember is that homeowners, including, in my case, I'm very excited to and proud to be supported by SEIU 1199, talking to a member who's a home health aide. Not a wealthy woman, a woman who's working hard, taking care of other people. And the way she pays her mortgage on her home is by having a renter. Well, she's at risk of losing her home. We can't have folks who are building wealth and supporting their families with ownership, property ownership, losing that. So what I did when I proposed my eviction moratorium back in February, I said, look, we are getting resources from the federal government. I will utilize those dollars to go to our homeowners and our landlords that have 1 to 5 buildings and say, look, you agree to hold on to your tenant, we will subsidize the rent. And we'll use those funds to do it so that we don't contribute to the homeless crisis that we have, but we also don't contribute to a loss of a gain in middle-class status for our people.
Right. We only have a minute left before I have to, or before I have the honor of throwing to my friend Adam Herbst. So one last question. We've been asking about fear in the subways. So are you afraid to ride the subways these days?
You know, I'm not afraid to ride the subways, but I have experienced what makes it scary. So I'll say both those things, you know, and a lot of that has been mental illness and homeless adults who, frankly, we have a way to solve that problem in a way that keeps us safe and in a way that ensures that we're doing it in a humanitarian way, which is mental health crisis outreach into safe havens, into supportive as a step into supportive housing. It works. I've seen the Project Hospitality in Staten Island as an example, and there's a way for the city to beef that up. I've been talking to homeless experts.
So a friend says to you, just to bring us down from kind of 30,000 feet here, friend says to you, you know what, I keep reading about people being pushed onto the tracks by crazy people. What do you tell them?
I tell them that is outrageous and unacceptable. And I tell them, here's what's going to
So they
change.
agree to that. Okay.
Look, it's terrifying. Here's what's going to change. We're going to have outreach workers proactively, not responding after a call, proactively going into the subways to do the mental health crisis outreach to get folks out of the subway safely into the programs and services that keep them off the subway, but does it in a way that meets their human needs. Because let's face it, it's a humanitarian crisis, but it's preventative. And we do that with deep seriousness and commitment of resources. It's a model that works, and we simply have to do it. And they still have a relationship with the police department. Nothing prevents us from calling the transit police in where necessary.
Okay, Adam?
Thanks, Andrew, and hey, Maya. I'm going to follow up the last question with a two-parter. How would your proposed reforms to policing impact the Jewish community's need for significant police protection from rising anti-Semitism? And how do we ensure that the morale and confidence is there to encourage the police to do their best to respond to the growing anti-Semitic violence?
You know, such an important question. The first is to recognize that there's a policing role in preventing anti-Semitism and hate crimes against the Jewish community. And that would include deployment. You know, one of the things I've been calling for is being smart and effective with our policing resources and deploying them where we know we need them. And that includes synagogues. That includes, and this is part of the partnership model and why the community partnership model is so important, because it's also understanding where and how it's happening and where we can have more intervention. It's also about having more investments in the public education and bridge building, because we have to partner across communities to keep all our folks safe. Jewish New Yorkers, incredibly important, and Asian and Pacific Islanders have been seeing a dramatic increase. But my point is, hate ain't gonna have a home here when Wiley is mayor. Because remember, as someone who is Black, this is something we experience. My kids got it on both ends, coming and going, Black and Jewish. And frankly, we're one city. We've got to be united and stand together, and the resources are going to be there for our Jewish communities to be protected. And I'm going to be a loud and vocal voice.
Thanks, Maya.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. I believe that Maya gets a minute now as a closing statement to say her last words. Please go ahead.
Well, it's been a tremendous privilege to be here. Let me just say that one of the reasons I felt called into this race as mayor is because there's so much more that unites us than divides us. And what we need now in a historic crisis and facing the violence and fear, hunger. I had the privilege of working with David Greenfield at a Kojo food pantry, seeing the incredible power and importance of the work that we will partner in government with faith-based leaders, with our communities, because we all have to come back. And this has to be a city that's livable, that's safe, and that's prosperous for all of us. And that's my commitment to the Jewish community that's also, frankly, part of my family.
Thank you, Maya. Appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you. Be safe and well.
Thank you.
You too.
Andrew, I'd like to introduce our next candidate, Kathryn Garcia. Welcome, Kathryn.
Good evening.
Hello, Kathryn Garcia. Nice to have you here. Thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
According to the rules we have, you get a minute opening statement, then we have a long, nice chat, and then you get a minute to close. So please, the stage is yours.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here with you this evening. I'm Kathryn Garcia. I'm a lifelong New Yorker, and I deeply love this city. And I'm running for mayor because we need a more livable city, a safer city where people can raise their children on their salary. But we all have to feel safe, regardless of the color of our skin. And I have been the city's crisis manager and delivered over and over again and managed billions of dollars in budgets and tens of thousands of employees. I've been there during Hurricane Sandy. I've been there during blizzards, and I've been there during COVID, when we literally were delivering 1 million meals a day and distributing another 500,000. I know how to make city government work for everyone because we have to come back strong from COVID. We need an economy that is thriving. We need to see art and culture and music, oh, and hopefully the New York Knicks doing well as we move forward. But I deeply love the work and being able to make it so that everyone feels they are a part of this city and that we are coming together strongly and coming out of this because it is imperative that we do this right. So I'm absolutely excited to be here and can't wait to chat with you.
Terrific. Well, we're excited to have you, and you're the star of the week. You're number one in the Emerson poll yesterday. How is it possible that the public is veering so kind of strongly, apparently, if you look at the polls, towards someone who's really known more for the nuts and bolts of government than for ideology? What's going on?
And this was the strategy we put together, and we are very excited. We've had some great weeks on the campaign with the endorsement by the New York Times and the Daily News, and then today the poll numbers. For many months, there have been a huge number of undecideds in this race, but if you dig into those poll numbers, they kept saying, we want experience. And so it was about making sure that we put our platform forward, which is really about vision, but execution, because they want someone who's going to get the job done.
Right. And, one of the kind of amazing sights to watch from the sidelines here has been the dance between Andrew Yang and yourself. And he, made such a big show for all these months about hiring Kathryn Garcia to run the government under him. Today, he got up at I believe in an interview and criticized you for the dirty streets while you were sanitation commissioner. What's going on there?
I'm going to go with he read the poll numbers because he was making my case for mayor without me having to make it.
Right.
And I was like, if you think I can run the government, then maybe I should just run the government. Right. I don't need someone to run my government.
Right. How do you feel about him suddenly calling into question your abilities?
Yes, I know. Isn't that fascinating? This is just politics. And so I find it to be, a good sign for the campaign that he's trying to hit now. Right.
Okay. So now you're the front runner, at least in one poll. And now everyone's going to take a look at you and take a look at your record a lot more closely, right?
I would hope that they would.
Right.
I want people to feel that they know exactly what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it to deliver for them.
Okay, good. So I spent a little time trying to get a handle on your record. You got, rave reviews for, being a troubleshooter. I did find a lot of coverage about an audit from the state controller. who found that, I believe it was last year, the scorecard ratings in the city found that 69% of streets and 58% of sidewalks were defined as dirty. There's also some criticism of your management. You found weaknesses in key management controls. Tell me about that, that audit and what your thoughts are about kind of what he found.
No, so there was a lot of that audit that we vigorously disagreed with, because one of the fundamental truths is that the numbers actually on scorecard had been at their highest in the city of New York under my leadership, which is where they literally go out and do a blind review of every street in New York every month. Yeah, it's done by by the mayor's office of operations.
Right.
We don't know where they're going, and
I think those numbers were scorecard numbers, at least according to the stories. I wasn't there.
No, they're I think he had his own little methodology that didn't make much sense. But as I said, I'm very proud of the work that we did at the Department of Sanitation and keeping the streets clean. And using, we made sure that we had the resources to pick up the baskets and to keep the brooms moving.
We've been talking a lot about public safety tonight because it's the number one issue on the minds of New Yorkers, according to the polls. What are you going to do to kind of balance the equation between heavy-handed policing on one hand and the public's fear of a lack of aggressive policing, which is perhaps led to a major spike in crime? How do you get that balance right?
We are seeing an increase in crime, and across many different fronts. Shootings are up, anti-Semitic crime is up, Asian hate crime is up, and subway crime is up. We have to have an effective police force. We need to be using the gun suppression unit to really go after that. We need to embed mental health professionals to go into the subway with cops and make a determination about whether or not a person is a danger to themselves or others. You need to have patrols on the streets in the neighborhoods where we are seeing hate crime, and fully fund the hate crime unit. That is imperative. We have to have safety in this city, or we cannot do anything else. You cannot reopen this economy. But that does not mean they have to be disrespectful. That is not something we can change the training so that we are focused particularly on the frontline supervision around how do you de-escalate, and then how do you measure community engagement so you get the outcomes of safer communities and communities that trust you, and then promote from there.
Okay, fair enough. I'm learning about you just like every other New Yorker is right now. You're an intriguing candidate. Watched the recent New York One debate, in which you there was one line that actually I kind of scratched my head about, which is ending surprise health inspections at restaurants. And I'm like, well, as a diner, do I really want the city not to do surprise health inspections of kitchens at the restaurants I'm eating at? Can you explain that?
Oh, absolutely. And this is about making sure that you still feel safe going to a restaurant. We certainly want you to be partaking in all of your local restaurants and supporting them. But we also know that it sometimes really hits employees at restaurants who are just recovering from COVID when they lose a day's pay. And it's not just the health inspectors, it's also the buildings department and DEP and the fire department who come.
Okay, fair enough. We've also been talking about public safety in terms of the subways. Mm-hmm. So what is your fear level or lack of fear when taking the subways? A lot of New Yorkers are getting incredibly anxious about going down there these days. Are you afraid to take the subways?
I've been on the subway pretty recently. I'm trying to remember which day I was on there this week. And I felt fine being down in the subways, but we have to take into account the fact that many people don't feel comfortable, and they need to see officers on patrol. I think I was at Court Street, and I did see officers on patrol on the platform.
Right.
That's important, but I don't want to go
extra feet away from the platform these days because of these pushing incidents?
I don't think I changed my behavior, actually, to be quite honest with you. But the other piece of this is I know what it was like in the 70s and 80s.
Right.
You know, I got mugged at a subway station. We can't actually have that happen again.
Right. What's the solution towards housing the homeless mentally ill? What should we do about that?
We have the solution. We've had it for years. It is about creating supportive housing where there are services for mentally ill, as well as those who are struggling with a substance abuse problem. When you have the services on site, you actually end up being able to turn that individual's life around. You know, I was talking to someone today who went through Project Renewal and had, you know, very forthcoming about the challenges they had coming out of the military. And then talking about how they were able to put their life back together with supportive housing, with being able to reach out at any time, to really deal with their substance abuse issues, and as a relationship with their kid and their grandchildren.
Now, I mean, ever since I think the Koch administration, we've been talking about supportive housing. Like, what can you do that the previous 4 or 5 mayors have been unable to do about this problem?
We seem to continue to wait to work just with the state. Like, you know, we're going to wait till the state also steps up to work with us. The city can go it alone. We don't have to wait for the state. And that is something that
in terms of financing is
right. We always are waiting. This is one of the reasons why homelessness skyrocketed is there was a state program called the Advantage program that the city participated in. And then it got cut at the state level. And then the city just was like, oh, it's gone. You know, if we want to, sometimes we're going to have to be first and the state will have to be second if we're going to tackle some of these issues.
Okay. Can you be a little more specific? I mean, what is it that you would, you know, you're elected mayor, it's January 1st, whatever, 2nd. What are you going to do about this problem?
So the first and foremost is actually engaging with the homeless in a different way and offering them beds in safe havens as well as beds where there is supportive housing. We do still have some, like we would run out of it, but you can start to have that. If you talk to someone who's homeless, because the outreach people do go into the subway and they do go on the street and talk to them and offer them shelter. They don't want shelter. They will not go into the congregate settings.
Right.
And
what do you do then? They refuse shelter.
You have to not offer them shelter. You have to offer them a permanent home.
Okay.
And we can, if we are doing a permanent home, even in an SRO, that starts to make a change.
Okay, fair enough.
Adam, engage with you.
Adam, do you have a question for Kathryn Garcia?
I sure do. Hey, Kathryn, nice to speak with you again.
Nice to speak with you, Adam.
So how should the city be responding to rising anti-Semitism? And what do you think is working? And what will we see change under our Garcia administration?
There's been rising levels of hate crime against sort of like literally starting to be every group these days. There has to be patrols out there at locations that we know are vulnerable, synagogues, yeshivas, so that people are protected. The second is we have to keep standing up against it. And the third is we've got to embed it into our curriculum to talk about all of the diverse communities in the city of New York and what they have contributed to making this a phenomenal place. We're having a real problem as New Yorkers thinking of ourselves as New Yorkers and not othering everyone in the conversation, whether or not that's on race or ethnicity or on religion.
Terrific. You got a minute to kind of sum up, Kathryn Garcia, please go ahead.
Well, I am thrilled to have been here. This is a real opportunity. I am deeply committed to this city, as many of you are. I want to see it thrive. I know that I have the skill set to understand where the light switches are at City Hall and the things that are going to trip us up and not make it so that we are successful. But a real vision of how we can make this a more livable city, a more affordable city, a city where people really do want to raise their children and then their grandchildren, a greener city where we are making the investments so that our air quality is better and our climate is safer. And I hope that I will look forward to everyone ranking me one come as soon as June 12th.
All right, terrific. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Take care.
So Andrew, before I turn it over to our next candidate, I'm going to give Zev Brenner an opportunity to give some station identification.
Okay.
No, thank you. First of all, that are just tuning in, and you're hearing some very important talk regarding what's happening here in New York City, what's going to be happening. So we appreciate the fact that Emu Health has graciously sponsored our radio broadcast here on WSNR 620 AM, WJPR 1640 AM, TalkLineNetwork.com. So thank you for graciously sponsoring that. Adam Herbst, you should be commended together with the whole team for putting together this broadcast. It took a lot of work. It's on YouTube, it's on Facebook, it's on Zoom, but it's also in conjunction with your organization, the Council of Orthodox Jewish Organization of the West Side. So you're commended for that. So thank you. And we have some more candidates coming up.
Thanks, Zev. So Andrew, I'd like to introduce our next candidate, Shaun Donovan. Welcome, Shaun. Andrew, it's all yours.
Adam, great to see you. Andrew, thanks for having me on.
Nice to see you too, Shaun. According to the rules of the game here, you begin and end with a 1-minute opener. So by all means, please start us off.
Thank you, Andrew. It is wonderful to be with you all tonight. I am a lifelong New Yorker who became a public servant because I grew up in a different time of crisis. As a child, I saw homelessness exploding on our streets. I saw communities like the South Bronx and Central Brooklyn literally crumbling to the ground. And that lit a fire in me to go to work on behalf of the city that I love. I started volunteering in a homeless shelter, came back from school, and worked for a nonprofit rebuilding those same neighborhoods I'd seen burning as a child. And that started a 30-year career on the front lines of rebuilding this city and this country. I was housing commissioner in the city in the wake of 9/11. When the worst housing crisis of our lifetimes hit, President Obama asked me to keep people in their homes and rebuild our economy. When Sandy hit our shores, he asked me to lead the entire recovery effort. And I guess because no good deed goes unpunished, he then asked me to lead the $4 trillion federal budget. And just weeks later, Ebola hit and then Zika. And I ended up working side by side with Dr. Fauci to prevent pandemics that could have cost our neighbors more than 30,000 of their lives. So I know what it means to lead through crisis. And I believe that I can repair, rebuild, and reimagine this city at this moment of crisis as a city that works for everyone. So thanks for having me on.
Sure. Thank you very much. All right, so let's get into it. You and Ray McGuire have something in common, that you're both have been extraordinarily successful in your careers, both very, very highly regarded, very accomplished. You have standing to run for mayor. You and he have also been kind of languishing at the bottom of the pack. Tell me about that, and tell me what has to happen now for New Yorkers to kind of discover and get excited by Shaun Donovan.
Well, Andrew, first of all, what I would say is that many New Yorkers didn't know me, despite my service when we started. And that is changing. And I now have much broader name recognition, but more importantly, what I'm hearing, what I'm feeling around this city is that people want two things. They want change. They don't want anyone from the current political status quo that is part of the de Blasio administration or is a current elected official, but they also want experience. Right. And what I'm hearing more and more, and this is why in all the polling we're seeing that we've done, I have more second and third choice votes than other candidates. What it's really a question of doing now, when no one has more than 15 or 20% of the first choice votes, is closing the deal with New Yorkers in these last few weeks to get to that level. This is a wide open race. Folks are just starting to tune in. Right. I think the other thing I would say, Andrew, is housing and homelessness are the #1 issues, along with crime, in every poll that we see. And I will continue making the case that there's no one in this race that can solve the housing and homelessness challenges we see in the way that I
Okay.
can.
Great. And we'll get into housing and homelessness. There's one more question about the race. Again, it's the same thing I've asked Ray McGuire, which is, you come from outside. You haven't run, I don't think you've ever run for public office before. What's been the biggest surprise you've had in the race so far?
Well, there's running for office, and then there's running for office in a pandemic. And the challenge has been, particularly through this winter, is connecting with voters. But
Right.
that really goes to, I wouldn't say it's a surprise, but it's a reminder of why I love this city. To be in a mosque with West African immigrants, and then in a temple and a church on the same day, to see the incredible diversity and range of New Yorkers. And frankly, when you're running for office, they will share their hopes, their dreams, their fears about the future of the city in a way that is deeply moving and powerful. And I think I had hoped that campaigning would be like that. But when we can get out of our Zoom boxes and actually get around the city,
Right.
it's a powerful reminder of how amazing this city is, what makes it remarkable, and also, frankly, why this is the most consequential election of our lifetimes, because people are hurting.
Now, you hit upon something which sounded true, which is that your former housing secretary, U.S. housing secretary, in charge of housing under Bloomberg. If I were you, I would do exactly what, I would say what you just told me, which is that I was the housing guy. I can fix our housing mess. And the biggest housing mess we have, and we've got a lot of them, is the problem at NYCHA, right? The public housing system is a complete and total catastrophe. Now, you're are you the guy with kind of the magic formula that's going to fix this, multi-billion-dollar disaster? And how would you do it?
Well, the answer to that, Andrew, is yes. And like so many things in this race, the folks watching tonight or listening don't need to just trust my words. They should look at my record. When I was HUD secretary, I created tools that allowed the best mayors, the best leaders around the country to fundamentally transform public housing. There was worse public housing in New Orleans and in San Francisco and many cities that is now much better than NYCHA, because they embraced the tools that I created to use Section 8 and other funding. But that didn't happen in New York. That didn't happen under Mayor de Blasio, under any of the leaders that he had at NYCHA. And that's the problem, is you can only do so much from the federal level. You have to have the levers of control. And here's what I would do. I would commit $2 billion a year of city capital. I would go to Washington in the stimulus bill, the jobs bill that Biden is proposing. There's $40 billion of public housing capital. I would get hopefully $10 billion of that. And I would use Section 8 and innovative partnerships with energy performance contracts to green public housing, put solar on the rooftops. All of that together would get us to the $40 billion that we need. I'm the only candidate that has a clear plan to do that. But you also, the money's not enough. You got to fix the management and go to truly site-based management. Here's what happens right now, Andrew. If your shower's leaking, by the time the 15 people that need to sign off on that repair all the way to 250 Broadway do, it's turned into mold that's causing your child asthma.
Right.
And what we need to do is site-based management, where you can walk into the office and the person there has the power, the money, and the tools to fix it in real time, not after months and months.
Okay, so make me a pledge here. 4 years into the Donovan administration, what are we going to see in terms of NYCHA?
Well, I'm not going to make false promises. We're not going to complete $40 billion worth of work within 4 years. But what you will see is the boilers working, the elevators working, people getting the things fixed that are creating these conditions. And here's the thing. You can't move faster than the speed of trust. Mayor de Blasio has lost, and NYCHA have lost, the trust of residents. And the single most important thing to restore that trust is to fix the things that are broken and to fix them quickly. Right. So I would do that in the first 2 years. And by the end of 4 years, I would have started huge renovations. I've secured the $40 billion, and we're renovating the projects around the city that are the highest priority.
Okay, fair enough. Let's move on. Yesterday, I saw you donned a Black Lives Matter T-shirt and got yourself arrested sitting down right in front of the Holland Tunnel,
It was a Holland
trying
Tunnel. Yep.
to block traffic. And you know, you got a picture in the paper of yourself in handcuffs. What was the point of that?
Andrew, the point is first to stand up and say we can't lose any more lives. But it isn't just lives from police violence. You can predict the life expectancy, the life chances of a child by the zip code they grow up in this city, and that's wrong. And we have to do more than just raise our voices and protest. We need to make sure that we're moving this city towards real change, real equity, real fairness. That's
Right.
why I was there. And I want to say one more thing, Andrew. 30 years ago this year, this week, in fact, I met with John Lewis and embarked as a student on a commemoration of the Freedom Rides, retraced the entire route. So for me, this week was particularly special as a recognition of the importance of nonviolent protest and civil action to make sure that as patriots, as Americans, we are raising our voices for what is wrong in our city and our country.
Right. Now, I mean, I've worked in numerous campaigns by now, and you know, in a situation like this, you sit around with a candidate, and the candidate says, "Okay, tomorrow I want to sit down in front of the Holland Tunnel and block traffic and get myself arrested." And the conversation within the campaign is, "Okay, is that going to be seen as a campaign stunt?" So, tell me, was it a campaign stunt? How do you think that came off?
Andrew, to be honest, I think describing commemorations of George Floyd's murder as stunts is not the conversation we should be having. I was invited. We did not plan this. Reverend McCall is someone I've worked with for years.
Right.
He and I share the same mentor in Bishop Johnny Ray Youngblood, who I started working with 30 years ago. He
Okay.
invited me to join him for something that he had planned. And that's how it happened. This did not come from my campaign. We didn't create this event. I was invited to participate on an important day in a act of civil disobedience. And again,
Okay.
that's something
Fair enough.
I've been doing for decades. That's not new to me
Right.
as a candidate.
Okay. You served in the Bloomberg administration, and you know, by my memory is got nothing but accolades for the effort. Let's talk about education,
Thank you.
if we can. The Bloomberg reforms, enormously controversial. I would argue extraordinarily successful. Bill de Blasio wouldn't agree. In fact, de Blasio kind of took a sledgehammer to the Bloomberg reform, kind of decimated every effort, rightly or wrongly. What would you do in terms of bringing back some of those reforms? How do you, I mean, half the kids in this city still aren't reading at grade level. What are you going to do?
So, first of all, Andrew, I appreciate the kind words about that period and the work that I did and the work we did more broadly in the Bloomberg administration. Look, first thing I would do is to say I'm for good schools, not to make it political or ideological. We have some phenomenal public schools in this city. We also have good charter schools, good religious schools, and we've got to stop putting politics and ideology ahead of our children. And so one of the things I would do is to build partnerships across our traditional public schools with other schools, co-locate. I hear all the time from principals that they want to do that work, and the political pressure from Tweed, from City Hall, stops them from being able to build those partnerships. What I would also do
Were
is
you
build
saying, just to clarify, were you saying that you want to resume the practice of co-location?
So first of all, where we have co-located schools, they ought to be working much more effectively together.
Okay.
Second, I do believe that in appropriate situations, co-location can work if we build the right partnership. So I am absolutely open to that. And there is demand. Let's be clear. We have communities across this city, particularly in the communities that are struggling the most with public schools, that aren't getting adequate schooling. There is demand for new charters and others. And I am absolutely open to doing that. But I also would say that there are community school models and others that we need to carry forward. And I believe that we do need to engage in more community-based input. I think the community education councils, the PEP, I'm for participatory budgeting, giving more control to principals. In some cases, that's the biggest concern I hear from them. So there are a range of changes I would make that don't go fully back to the Bloomberg model as well.
Thank you. Adam, you have a question for Shaun Donovan.
Yes. Hi, Shaun. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Thanks, Adam.
The mayor of New York is the mayor of the largest Jewish community in the world outside of Israel. It's also the location of rising anti-Semitic violence. What kind of outreach would you do to reassure the Jewish community that you are prioritizing a response to anti-Semitism and protecting the Jewish community?
So, Adam, let me just say, as a lifelong New Yorker, as the grandson of an Ashkenazi Jew, as a child who, despite my name being Shaun Donovan, grew up surrounded by the Jewish faith. My school was large majority Jewish. I spent a lot of days, Saturdays in temple after Friday night sleepovers and at bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs. And my sister converted after she finished college with my blessing, because we felt a real spiritual tie to the Jewish community in this city growing up. And I've done work throughout my career, whether it's with Met Council, UJA, UJO, so many different Jewish organizations that have been a powerful part of lifting up all New Yorkers. I would also say, and this goes back to what I said a moment ago, starting 30 years ago, I really began to understand and meet Black leaders, Jewish leaders across this country who came together to raise their voices, to say, we will not tolerate hate of any group. And we need a mayor who has done that through their career. When I was housing secretary, I gave real meaning to the Fair Housing Act of 1968 to make sure that everyone could live wherever they choose, despite the color of their skin, their religion, all of the different ways that we discriminate, to stop that. So much so that President Trump was attacking my work with racist tweets about destroying the suburbs. And so I've been a leader on these issues. I would absolutely speak out, and I would act. I would beef up and make permanent the Office to Prevent Hate Crimes at City Hall. We need to do more on the policing side, but we also have to recognize that there needs to be full coordination from City Hall around this to get
Shaun,
our community organizations to build trust and to have trusted messengers reaching out as well.
I'm sorry, we're in a tight schedule. I see Andrew Yang is on deck here. Very briefly, if you could kind of sum things up in the next 30 seconds or so, it would be wonderful.
Absolutely. I believe that at this moment, when we need fundamental change, but also a candidate that brings deep experience leading again and again through crisis, that I am the mayor to repair, rebuild, and reimagine this city. We are running the Campaign of Ideas, a more than 200-page book that lays out ways that we can transform our city into a safer, a more prosperous, and also a more equitable city. And I would love your support to be that mayor and to make this a city that works for everyone. So thank you. Thank you for having me on tonight.
Thank you so much. Totally appreciate your joining us. Thank you.
Big elbow bump to everyone.
Thanks, Shaun.
Take care.
Andrew, before we get to our last candidate, Andrew Yang, I just want to turn it back over to Deb Brenner for station identification.
And we thank everybody for tuning in tonight to our special broadcast. And let me just
Zeb, I believe that Adam's microphone is muted.
Okay, so those, thank you for, we're on a variety of different electronic forums tonight, including Talkline Network over WSNR 620 AM. We've replaced Talkline with Zev Brenner for tonight's broadcast so we can present a very important forum hosted by Andrew Kirtzman, And of course, brought to you by the Council of Jewish Organizations, Orthodox Jewish Organizations of the West Side, and by ExcelsiorNYC.com. So we have all the candidates, and we also want to thank tonight Emo Health for graciously sponsoring our very, very special broadcast tonight. We'll give you more information about them later on, but I want to make sure we have room for Andrew Yang. So turn it back to you, Adam.
Thanks, Zev. So Andrew, I'd like to introduce our final candidate this evening, Andrew Yang. Andrew, thanks for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity. I didn't know I was last until you just said that. Now I'm a little bit hurt.
Well, we're excited to have you, and by the rules of this this format, you begin and end with a 1-minute little speech. So please, I give you the floor.
Thank you. I want to talk about what we're seeing and feeling every day here in New York. We have families, we walk our streets, but unfortunately there's a sense of unease. We're not even confident taking the subways or walking in certain environments. Some of our friends have been victimized. Some of our friends have left the city, in part because of these safety concerns. Nothing is going to work in New York City if we are not safe. This is job one of the next mayor. I have a big vision for New York City, but everything starts with the basics. If your family doesn't feel safe, if you can't feel confident letting your kids go out on their own or maybe go with a sitter someplace, you start to think deeply about the city that you've spent years, decades in, that you love dearly, but you have to do what's right for your family. This is something that we have to turn around and change as quickly as possible. And I will deliver on that as mayor.
Terrific. Okay, so let's get into it if we can. You've had quite a week. You know, kind of taking a step back on this campaign, up until now, it's kind of been the campaign about Andrew Yang, right? Your rise, it being kind of a phenomenon. And now we're kind of in kind of the part of the novel here where you you find yourself in danger. The danger, from my perspective, please feel free to push back here, is that you've got kind of this very toxic dynamic where the press is playing stump the candidate, right? They've created this narrative, or you've created this narrative, someone's created this narrative of you're not knowing enough about city government, city issues. Fairly or unfairly. And so every day becomes an effort by reporters to find something else that they can stump you with. That's a really, really tough spot for a politician to be in. What do you do about that? What do you say to people? Not every elected official or politician knows every single issue. What do you do?
Andrew, New Yorkers know that the city is in tough shape, and that unfortunately our government has been failing us for years and years. And if people think that the change we need is going to come from someone who's been rattling around our bureaucracy or climbing the ladder for years and decades, the people I talk to every day know different. So there's a lot of excitement and energy around the change that we need. And it's going to take the form of a different type of leadership that our campaign is going to deliver. So you're right about the fact that I've been leading contender for quite some time, but we feel tremendously optimistic and confident because it's almost voting time. Early voting is June 12th. We think that a lot of people are going to come to the polls, and we're going to be in position to win this race and change the city. Right.
So yesterday, I believe you came out and did a very unusual thing for yourself and kind of lobbed a grenade into the campaign, charging that racism is behind a lot of the attacks on you. It seemed like kind of a discordant note, but tell me about that, and tell me, was that an effort to kind of break this this kind of detrimental dynamic here?
Well, we were specifically calling out a cartoon in the Daily News that presented me as a racialized caricature, kind of, and we were literally attending an event around an Asian man who was pushed onto the subway tracks, targeted likely because of his race, which is something that unfortunately Jewish New Yorkers have also been experiencing and feeling over the last number of days and weeks. And so I felt it was necessary to say that this kind of depiction of someone who's lived here for 25 years as a permanent tourist, unfortunately does have racial meaning. And it's something that I can pretty much guarantee that every Asian American who looks at that says, yup, like, this is me as the perpetual foreigner. And I do think that we have to take these issues very seriously, given that people are getting beaten and attacked on the streets of New York over perceptions of who belongs and who doesn't.
Right. Okay. Today, there was another instance, just to my perception, of you kind of taking kind of like a left turn somewhere in the kind of Andrew Yang, candidate of optimism brand, which had you really kind of insulting Kathryn Garcia's term as sanitation commissioner, citing the dirty streets in the city while she was commissioner. And this is just like at the blink of an eye after you've spent so long courting her to run the city government under you. I mean, what was that about?
Andrew, I was asked a direct question by Brian Lehrer. Why do you think you'd be a better mayor than Kathryn Garcia? And I like and admire Kathryn. But when asked that question, I said, look, she's projecting herself as someone who made things happen under the de Blasio administration. And there are still a lot of problems that persist. The big picture is that we do need a different form of leadership, but it doesn't take away from the fact that I like and admire Kathryn. I just think that I would make a better choice for mayor.
Right. I guess it begs the question of, if you were questioning whether she was a good sanitation commissioner leading, all those dirty streets, why you wanted her to run the government under you in the first place.
Well, say run the government is first completely off base. I said I'd like to have her as part of my, I'd like to have her as part of my administration. And she is the sort of person I would like to have as part of my administration. She does have a wealth of government experience, but I do think imagining that she fixed the city's problems while she was in office is probably a bit of an overstatement.
Okay. So now let's talk about sanitation in this city. What did Bloomberg get right and wrong on sanitation? What did de Blasio get right and wrong on sanitation?
Well, I want to speak about what people care about, Andrew, which is what's going on right now. And I cannot tell you how many New Yorkers have said to me that they have no idea why there's so much trash on the streets and on their neighborhoods, and that it's reached epic proportions. If you look at the internet, you can see pictures of trash strewn about all over the place. And this is something that we have to change. It's lending itself to the sense of disintegration that unfortunately is pervasive in many neighborhoods. It's one reason why I've committed to reducing street homelessness by 50% or more in my first term, which is something we can completely do. We just need to
if I could just get back to that.
Sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
Apologies. If I could just get back to the question, which is what did de Blasio get right, and what did he get wrong when it came to his policies on sanitation?
I think that one thing he got wrong was that during COVID, he cut back on the Department of Sanitation budget, which I guess was thinking is like, well, let's try and save some money and let's cut down on the frequency of pickups. And then you saw piles of trash everywhere and people looked up and said, wait a minute, like this doesn't seem right. But the thing that is distressing to many of us, Andrew, is that they restored those cuts a couple of months ago, or so they say, but no one's seen any improvement. And so you look around saying like, wait a minute, like if the resources were restored, why is the trash still there? So I understand. And I also want to build in the fact that we're still facing an ongoing budget crisis by the mayor's own accounting. He's saying that we have a $5.3 billion deficit we're facing by 2023. And so we should be preparing for that deficit today, but we're not seeing any of that out of City Hall right now.
What would you do differently when it came to sanitation that would result in cleaner streets?
Well, you have to make sure the resources are there. You have to make sure that the workers are there. You have to make sure that the union rules actually make sure that you have the frequency that New Yorkers are looking for, and that there's some kind of mechanism of responsiveness when a New Yorker is seeing piles of trash in their neighborhood routinely. Right now, it's unclear even how that gets communicated to the city outside of, again, social media pictures. So this is something that I want to make sure and focus on, because there's no ideological way to pick up the trash. Like you're either doing a good job or you're not. And
Right.
if you're not doing a good job of that, then people don't trust you to get the other things right either.
Right, right, fair enough. Let's talk about low performing schools if we can. To switch gears and talk about education. We've been, we were just discussing with Kathryn Garcia and others, Shaun Donovan, the Bloomberg approach to closing low performing schools. He would just, you know, they were chronically low performing. He'd basically, you know, they would quantify it and call them a lost cause, shut them down, and reconfigure them. Do you favor that? Because de Blasio ended that practice. What do you think?
I'm much closer to Mike Bloomberg than Bill de Blasio when it comes to educational approaches. I want to do whatever's best for our kids. And I've got a child in public school myself. So this is personal for me. And I would want my mayor just to try to deliver the best education possible, regardless of the other interests involved. So any school that's delivering results for our kids, we should be trying to augment or replicate. Any school that is failing to deliver, of course you want to remediate. You know, you're not going to take a dramatic first step, but if a school continuously underperforms our kids, then everything has to be on the table. And I want to say that the best way that I think we can help our schools improve is by letting principals actually lead and manage within their own buildings. I've talked to principals who say their hands are tied, they can't make hiring decisions, they can't make budgeting decisions. And I would be very, very frustrated if I was a principal or teacher or child in that school.
Another question I've been asking other candidates, so I'll throw it to you, is about how to get how to reward a teacher who's doing a terrific job, and how to fire a teacher who's doing a bad job. It's, you know, the U of T has made it all, like, virtually impossible to do that. Would that be a priority of yours?
Well, again, I want to let leaders lead and principals manage what's going on inside their school. And it's very hard to manage what's going on if you can't reward someone who's doing a great job or penalize someone who's doing a terrible job. So to the extent that union rules go against that, what I see as a very common sense basic principle, then it's something I would want to try and negotiate and work out with the U of T, with the thought that, look, most teachers are great and they should be rewarded. You know, this isn't like a somehow you know, anti-teacher measure. This is just a good management measure.
And what do you think the chances are of the U of T agreeing to that?
Well, we may find out. But one thing I do want to say that this is emblematic of, Andrew, is that we have a lot of things that have not worked in our city for a long time. And you need someone to come in and say, okay, maybe we should change some of the approaches we've had for a long time. And of course, there's going to be immediate resistance, and there are going to be special interests saying, no, no, no. But we have to make these changes now. Our city is in very, very dire circumstances. And if we can't make those changes now, we may be lost. Like, the future of the city genuinely could start trending negatively. We start cutting services. People are continuously filled with doubt. More people leave, and then things can become very negative. So what's happening with this discussion you're describing with the teachers union, it has to happen with the sanitation union. It has to happen with different interest groups. I'm going to come in, and there's a great chance, I think people listening to this and watching this know, there's a great chance I'll be the next mayor, and I will not owe anyone anything except the people of New York City to deliver for us and our families. And that is what we need right now.
Fair enough. Adam, you have a question for Andrew Yang.
I sure do. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for joining us this evening. So you've built considerable support in the Orthodox community, and your support for Israel in the recent conflict was widely appreciated in mainstream Jewish communities. You've also faced considerable backlash for that support, including within your own campaign. Do you regret the clarity of your support for Israel, and how do you think the city should respond to rising anti-Semitism?
Anti-Semitism is a deadly scourge that must be combated at every turn. I take it as seriously as it deserves to be taken, which is that this is something that has killed millions of people in the past. And you can see very clearly that anti-Semitism is on the rise Being mayor of a city that houses the largest Jewish population outside of Israel is a sacred trust, and I will live up to that trust every single day. I don't know how I could have done anything but express my support for the Jewish people and the people of Israel during this time. I spoke to many people who have family members who are in shelters and were concerned for their lives. So I'll continue to make that stand, and I think that it's the right thing to do.
Thanks, Andrew.
All right, Andrew Yang, you've got a minute to wrap this up, so please go ahead.
Thank you for this opportunity. We need a change in New York City. I want to be a mayor to deliver that change. I've had different experiences in different environments. I think the thing that some of you may relate to is I've run a private business in New York City that grew to become #1 in the US. And when you run a private company, you know that you have to deliver value every day. No one cares about excuses. No one cares about politics. You just have to get things done in a way that's going to work for people. And that's what we've needed in New York City government for a long time. We just have to make it work for people. That's going to be my mission. I would love your support in making it happen. Our city needs us. Our city is in very, very tough shape. We can all feel it. We can feel it in our souls. And we need to come together and get our city heading in a better direction as quickly as possible.
Terrific. Andrew Yang, thank you so much for your time tonight. We deeply appreciate it.
Thank you all. Have a great night.
You too.
So thank you, Andrew. Andrew Kirtzman, I'd like to just finally turn it back over to Zev Brenner for one moment, and then we'll conclude this evening. Zev?
Yes. Anyway, what a wonderful evening, and we really got to cover some very important issues that affects all of us New Yorkers. And I'm very appreciative to the Council of Orthodox Jewish Organizations of the West Side and your group. Adam Herbst is the one behind the scenes putting it together. The ExcelsiorNYC.com for putting together this mayoral forum, which had an Allison doesn't want recognition. .org. Okay, so that's ExcelsiorNYC.org. Okay, .org. We got to make sure you got it correctly between the org and the com. That's a good comment that we made. And anyway, this program was graciously sponsored. This broadcast on WSNR 620 AM, WJPR 1640 AM, TalkLineNetwork.com was graciously sponsored by Emu Health, which features a state-of-the-art ambulatory surgery center and newly renovated multi-specialty physician offices. They're very conveniently located at 83-40 Woodhaven Boulevard in Glendale, Queens. And Emu Health offers women's health, ingenious 3D mammography, surgery center, GYN, cancer screening, primary care, orthopedics, cardiology, wellness, board-certified doctor, and so much more. And their award-winning facilities and staff are worth a trip from anywhere. So if you're listening and watching us in Queens or Brooklyn or Manhattan, wherever you are, they are worth a trip from everywhere. Most major insurance plans are accepted. For more information, please call them at 718-849-8700. That's 718-849-8700 online. And I'm going to spell out emuhealth.com. And thank you for helping us, making sure that so many people got to participate during this very, very special election forum.
Thanks so much, Zev. I want to just say, before we conclude this evening, to Andrew Kirtzman, our moderator, how wonderful you were, how erudite and, just very, very informative in terms of the questions you've asked. I think that all of the listeners really were able to learn so much more about the candidates because of your wonderful questions, your engagement, and you were just wonderful. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're very lucky to have you. We're very lucky to have all the candidates. And just want to give you one last second to say any last remarks, and then we'll conclude.
Well, thank you for those kind words, Adam. And it's very hard to overstate how much work went on behind the scenes for an event like this. So hats off to you and to the entire crew. And thank you for giving me this honor to join you tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Go to ExcelsiorNYC.org to see this recording. If you'd like in the future, and also to see future events and also learn more about ranked choice voting, we'll certainly put that up, and we look forward to having you engage with us more. Thank you so much and have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Good night.